what's stopping you, right? It's the price that's stopping you. Then lower down the budget. Start free. Start with Anchor, for example, right? I started off with my podcast with Anchor, and till now I'm still using Anchor. I'm not using Podbean, even though there are definitely a lot of great benefits from Podbean, because Podbean will help you to analyze iTunes and Spotify and all this other stuff. Not saying that Anchor doesn't, but Anchor has their own restrictions, even
Right.
though they say that there's certain benefits and all this other stuff. But yeah, it's the same. So if you want to start, if any one of you who are tuning in right now, you want to start small and then grow bigger and better.
Yeah.
And
Well, just
don't-
start. Just
Don't
start.
stop yourself.
I mean,
Yeah.
take a look at Rayson's example. Again, I don't want to keep harping on the fact, but you're a young guy in a small country. You have very, I'm guessing, limited funds to buy equipment and stuff. So you take what you have. You start with just your smartphone. From there, over time, and as you get better, you may be able to invest in more stuff, or if you become a big enough podcaster, you might catch the attention of some of these manufacturers of microphones and cameras and stuff. That's not an impossibility. And I'll be honest with you, as I sit here talking to you and then go to my A cam over there, which is a Canon 70D, and I come back to my main shot here off my Sony A6000, the only reason I have those cameras is because I had them before I started podcasting. They're just cameras that I had for taking still photos. And then I started looking into doing live streaming and found out that, oh, the cameras I already have can live stream. I don't have to buy anything. I've already bought it. And by the way, there's probably a lot of people out there in this audience right now that you guys have technology that can get you podcasting and maybe even podcasting and live streaming simultaneously very easily already on your laptops, or, you know, if you've got a webcam, everyone's got to have a webcam for Zoom, right? If you've got a webcam, you can be a live streamer. If you've got a decent microphone, and by the way, I don't know about you, but a whole lot of my guests use these Apple plug-in headphones with the microphone. The microphone they use is this microphone that's in the right there, this tiny little thing. Well, guess what? The quality of it is good enough. It's not great. It's good enough. By the way, I just talked to a friend of mine who I interviewed on the podcast, and he interviewed someone who was on his iPhone for his podcast. And so he's like, oh, it's not going to be great audio. It was really good audio because it was a brand new Apple iPhone 13. And evidently the microphones on those things are fantastic. So you don't need an external mic. You don't have to use AirPod Pros or anything like that. You can talk right into the phone as long as it's fairly close to your face, and you'll get a great audio feed for anyone who wants to record you as a podcast guest, or if you want to start doing a podcast. So I would take a page out of the playbook that Rayson's written, and that is, don't start when it's perfect and you've got everything in alignment. Just start, period. Try it. Be embarrassed for 10 episodes. By the way, it doesn't matter. No one's going to know you're alive in podcast world. No one's going to hear it except maybe your mother. So go ahead and do it. Interview your friends, interview your family, interview anybody just to start the whole ball rolling. And this is my pro tip for anyone in podcasting. Edit your episodes yourself so that you burn the ums, so's, and wells out of your mouth. You'll notice that both Rayson and myself don't drop a lot of ums or filler words. Why? I know why. For me, I've had to cut them all out in edit. And I've gotten sick of cutting out ums and ahs and wells and so's and you knows. Because here in the United States where I live, you know is like something people always say, you know, that's a really interesting question. You know, you can't say you know every 2 seconds. So if you want to be a better public speaker, start a podcast, edit it yourself, and you will become a better, more confident public speaker, a better, more confident salesperson, a better, more confident networker, and I'll just say this, a better, more confident human being, because these are transferable skills across everything you do in life.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Like, legit, when you start to build your own podcast, or when you start your own speaking journey, or whatsoever journey that you want, it will always be something that you will stumble upon in terms of like the ums, the ahs, and all this other stuff. And not just the filler words, in fact. It's also your confidence level will start to boost up, especially as you grow with your own episodes of podcasts, and also at the same time talking to different people from different states, different countries. You start to realize a lot of stuff about yourself and around the world. You might be in that small little pond in Singapore, like myself, and then slowly it goes out. It goes to Nebraska, it goes to probably Atlanta, and then after that it goes to Canada, it goes to New Zealand, Australia, whichever country that you're exploring in, right? So it took me a while to become this version of Rayson Choo. So if you are going to start, you don't expect yourself to jump from level 1 to level 99 within like 5 months. It will not be so fast. Same goes with business and all this other stuff. It will take years, in fact. It took me for about 5 to 6 years. I started off 2017 in terms of this podcast. I had this dream in 2014, but I only started off in 2017. And then it took me about, in fact, not 5 years, but I would say 4 years, right? 2017 to 2021 right now. It took me about 4 years plus to reach where I am right now. At the start, it was pretty bad at first. Like, I do not know what kind of questions to ask. I went improv and it didn't turn out really well because I have a lot of R's, I have a lot of M's, I have a lot of N, and it got me so sick of that. I was like, a lot of my speaking friends were telling me, hey, you got to cut this down. You're going to do this. How about you try this method out and then you stop those filler words. You don't have to keep saying this sentence again and again, well, right? And it sinks into my mind. And even when I interviewed John Lee Dumas, right, at the episode of like 80-ish, I can't remember the actual number, but I remembered it was like only this year when I interviewed Johnny Dumas, and he taught me how to ensure that I make my guests even more pleasant in a sense. To sum it up, he actually taught me not to yes, yes during my whole podcast, which I did a lot of time, and it pissed him off a bit, and I felt bad. And that was the time when I actually sat down and listened to what he said and what he said, because he is the grandmaster of podcasting, right?
Right.
Not just him. There's other people, right, that are also really brilliant in podcasting, like Steve Olsher, for example, and many more. This guy sat me down during my interview, which is a live, unfortunately. It was really a LinkedIn Live and Facebook Live, and he sounded pissed in a sense, even though his ego was high, because he has that stature in him, and he knew that he was expecting something awesome from this person that's going to interview him. But apparently, the ahas pissed him off because he actually had been through this process before. He had a lot of ahas and ums and all this other stuff during his many, don't know how many hundreds of episodes before he actually realized that, hey, I have to stop. And that's where he talked to me about it on my podcast. And that's where I decided to, okay, I have to stop the ahas and the ums. And I have to just nod my head in silence. And I just learned from there. And I decided that, hey, this is really good. This is something that I should be practicing all this while, which I didn't. And I realized that, wow, this is something that it's like a lesson for me. So every time, even when, no matter how pro you are, no matter how long of years that you have been doing your niche, for example, like podcasting or marketing or whatsoever, you will meet this kind of mini bumps along the way. And you will get to learn through people like them who actually shared with you certain things. And that's where I actually learned myself that, oh, I've been making this mistake. And I realized that it's not too late. In fact, it's never too late unless if you decided to quit after that episode of podcast, which I didn't, right? And then there will be something negative in a sense. It will affect you, right? But
Yeah.
then I told myself, man, it's a monumental push for me. I'm gonna learn from this. I'm gonna work on it, and I'm gonna make sure it doesn't happen for the next episode. And guess what? Next episode, the ums and the ahas, it got lesser, way lesser. And the following episode, it got even lesser to near zero. And then slowly, perfect, none. I don't really have that so many times. I just know when to use it, when not to, and it went perfectly fine.
This episode of the Nonfiction Brand podcast is brought to you by my new book, Nonfiction Brand. Discover, craft, and communicate the completely true, completely you brand you already are, now available on Amazon.com. Jay Baer, best-selling author of Talk Triggers, said, "The book is outstanding, highly recommended, a spectacularly useful guide to personal branding that pulls off the difficult trick of being both realistic and inspirational. A must-read, regardless of where you are in your own brand-building journey." To get your copy, head on over to Amazon.com and search Nonfiction Brand. And let's get you all the credit you deserve for the completely true, completely you brand you already are.
The John Lee Dumas that Rayson's talking about has a podcast called Entrepreneurs on Fire. And it's, oh my God, it's a podcast that's one of the most popular in the kind of inspirational entrepreneurial space, if you will. And if I remember correctly, when he started out, he had, I'm not going to get the number right, but it was like maybe 25 to 50 episodes in the can, meaning they were already produced before he went live with his podcast, because he was going to go live every day, I think, or he wanted to release a new podcast every single day. And that's worth listening to. And one of the things I always talk to people about when they're thinking about doing a podcast is find one that suits your style. Not that you want to copy, but you feel some affinity toward. For example, my podcast, I have 2 seconds of music at the front. That's 2 seconds more before I start talking. That's 2 seconds more than I want to have, because one of my favorite podcasts has no music, no intro, no nothing, because I'm convinced that John Gruber of the talk show podcast knows my audience knows who I am. They know who I'm going to be talking to because they've read the show notes. I don't need to introduce anything. I don't need to waste any time. Let's go right into it. I don't quite do that, but that's my inspiration. That's kind of my, if I could be that put together, that's what I want to sound like. Other people, like one of the most popular podcasts here in the United States is the New York Times, The Daily. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but the host of that is a guy named Michael Barbaro. And he does a thing I call the Barbaro, which is the because he's interviewing people. And unlike what Rayson was just talking about, he does it on purpose to indicate that we're in a conversation. I'm listening to you and I'm, And so that's why I call it the Barbaro. And I choose not to Barbaro ever, if possible. I will occasionally agree with you if you've said something that I particularly agree with. And frankly, I agree with a lot of what Rayson's doing and what he's talked about on this podcast. And as we get around to wrapping up this podcast, I do want to let you have a second or two to talk about the Raygacy Show, what it's about, what you've got coming up, and where people can find it.
Sure. So for the Raygacy Show is all about picking the brains of the best entrepreneurs around the world. People like DP, people like Steve Sims, Grant Cardone, Gary Vaynerchuk, and many more, right? All this, in fact, is to actually enlighten and to give more millennial entrepreneurs a guided sense where to go, how to do their things, and what are the inspirational stories that they can actually pick up from. And then from there, they, in fact, can learn from all these amazing people and they can apply it into their businesses. And apparently, quite a number of them that actually followed this podcast has actually gotten a lot of enlightenment. And I'm really grateful that all these people that has came on board on the podcast has shared so many gems, so many golden nuggets with me and my audience as well. And even like during the live interview that we had, like with DP, it was so amazing, where there are people who wanted to immediately go and buy his book, and they are from US, and they're not based in Singapore, right? They're all watching from the States, they're watching from other parts of the world, and people from England, there are people from Malaysia, there are people from Thailand, and all these other parts of the world. They are watching and they are tuning in to the podcast as well. So this is a podcast that is universal. It is not just like, oh, it's meant for Singaporeans only. No, it's meant for everyone, because every businesses, their systems and techniques and tactics and all, they're all similar. I wouldn't say 100% the same, but they are probably 70%, 80% similar for each and every niche that are doing businesses, right? So in my opinion, you can actually tune into this podcast. You can listen to the first episode, or whichever episode that you want to listen to, which you find that is really inspiring and interesting for you. Go ahead and tune in, and you can find them on Anchor. You can find it on Spotify, iTunes, and all the other major podcast platforms. And if you want to watch it live and you want to have your questions answered, for example, you can go on the Facebook Live and LinkedIn Live whenever we are having any guests on the show. And it is spelled as Raygacy. So it's the Raygacy Show. You can find it on all these major platforms. And what's coming up next is we are going to have a few other entrepreneurs that's from the States, people like David Wood, people like Robert Rilpel, and etc. So stay tuned for those amazing episodes, and we are planning to go even have people coming on to have their things sponsored to us. So we are getting sponsorships, starting to have sponsorships as well. So we'll see how it goes, and if it turns out well, I will let people know on my social media as well.
Well, there you go. Rayson Choo, a guy you should know, especially if you want to know what people from Singapore are thinking about the world of, let's call it the world of entrepreneurial inspiration. Yeah, sounds good to me.
Good.
Rayson, I want to thank you so much for being on the Nonfiction Brand podcast. As always, I would love for Nonfiction podcast listeners to like, subscribe, refer, and review this podcast wherever you find it, because that really does help other people find it. Also, I want to offer this to anybody who's listening, the opportunity to download 3 free PDF worksheets from nonfictionbrand.com/gift, and that'll help you get started on your personal branding journey, if you will. And again, I just want to say a big, super big thank you to Rayson Choo of Singapore and the Raygacy Show for being on the podcast. That's it for me. I'm your host, DP Knudten, and he is
Rayson Choo.
And I'll be talking at you again live and on the podcast next time. Bye-bye.